$3,000 for a scope that can't hit the broadside of a barn from 10 feet away. Sir, this equipment is faulty. The frustrated shout from Corporal Diaz echoed across the dusty firing range, cutting through the oppressive heat. He slammed a magazine onto the bench, his face a mask of youthful indignation. This was the third consecutive day of failure, a deep and spreading stain on the platoon's record. Every shot was a ghost, a puff of dust somewhere in the vague vicinity of the target, but never where it was supposed to be. They were Marines, the tip of the spear, and they were shooting like raw recruits. The air was thick with tension, shame, and the acrid smell of burnt powder. From a forgotten corner of the base, an old man heard nothing of this. He was simply doing his job. If you believe true honor is quiet and unwavering, type respect in the comments below. His name was Arthur Morgan, and his world had shrunk to the four walls of the base armory. It was a place that smelled of history, of gun oil, worn wood, and cold steel. He was the civilian armorer, a ghost in a faded flannel shirt and worn denim, surrounded by the gleaming modern implements of war he was tasked to maintain. His hands, gnarled with age and crosshatched with a lifetime of fine scars, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He wasn't polishing a new M27IR. He was tending to an old M1 Garand from a long-forgotten conflict, its walnut stock glowing under his patient care. He was a relic tending to a relic. The young Marines who cycled through the armory saw him as little more than a piece of the building's foundation. Old, silent, and entirely irrelevant to their high-speed, high-tech world. They saw his age, his stoop, his quiet deference, and dismissed him completely. They had no idea that those steady hands had once held the fate of men in their grip, or that his faded blue eyes had seen more through a rifle scope than they had seen in their entire lives. The crisis on Range 7 escalated. Lieutenant Evans, a young officer whose confidence was built on a bedrock of technical manuals and simulator scores, was at his wit's end. He paced behind his platoon, his jaw tight. "It's not you, Marines," he barked, trying to project an authority he was rapidly losing. "We've run diagnostics. We've checked the fundamentals. It has to be the rifles." A bad batch of scopes, maybe Corporal Diaz, his best marksman, nodded in vigorous agreement. "These new optics are too complicated, sir. Too many things to go wrong." They blamed the wind, the ammunition, the heat shimmer, the sun's angle, everything except the one constant: their own magnificent, infallible equipment. Colonel Hayes watched from the observation tower, his binoculars steady. He was a man carved from granite and experience, and he saw something the young lieutenant did not. He didn't see faulty equipment. He saw a fundamental error, a subtle but catastrophic flaw that was being overlooked. He saw arrogance. After another full volley resulted in nothing but scattered impacts across the berm, he lowered his binoculars, a decision hardening in his eyes. He knew a man who didn't trust fancy electronics, a man who trusted steel, glass, and the undeniable truth of a bubble level. Colonel Hayes's command vehicle, a black SUV that radiated authority, pulled up outside the drab armory building. The sight of it sent a ripple of curiosity through the few personnel milling about. The colonel didn't visit the armory. He summoned people from it. He stepped out, his uniform immaculate, and entered the cool, quiet dark of the building. He found Arthur exactly where he knew he would be, sitting on a simple wooden stool, a small torque wrench in his hand. "Arthur." The colonel's voice was low, respectful. It held a warmth no one else on the base ever heard from him. Arthur looked up, his movements unhurried. He didn't stand on ceremony. He simply nodded. "Colonel, I have a problem, old friend," Hayes said, leaning against a weapon rack. "My best shooters can't hit paper. They're blaming the gear." Arthur set his wrench down carefully on a clean rag. "The gear's usually fine," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It's the space between the stock and the scope that's the problem." "That's what I thought too," the colonel admitted. "But this is different. It's too consistent. Every single one of them. I need your eyes, Arthur. I need your hands." A silent understanding passed between the two men. It was a request that went beyond rank and civilian status. It was a plea from one veteran to another. Arthur gave a slow, single nod. "Get my kit." The walk to Range 7 was a spectacle. The platoon, taking a forced break, watched in stunned silence as the formidable Colonel Hayes walked onto their range, followed by the old, stooped man from the armory. Arthur carried a small, worn leather tool roll, its contents a mystery. Lieutenant Evans strode forward, saluting sharply. "Colonel, sir, we were just about to recalibrate the laser bore sighters." His voice was laced with an almost frantic need to appear in control. "That won't be necessary, Lieutenant," Colonel Hayes said, his voice flat and cold. "Mr. Morgan will be inspecting the rifles." Evans's eyes flickered from the colonel to Arthur, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "Sir, with all due respect, this is highly advanced optical equipment. Our certified armorers have already cleared them. This gentleman," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely at Arthur, the disrespect hanging thick in the air. Corporal Diaz snickered audibly from the firing line. The colonel's gaze hardened into chips of ice. He took a step closer to the lieutenant, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. "Lieutenant, your certified armorers learned their trade from a PowerPoint presentation. This gentleman," he said, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder, "wrote the manual they based that presentation on." The air crackled. The snickering stopped. Every eye was now fixed on the old man. "Before he retired as a master gunnery sergeant," Colonel Hayes continued, his voice now carrying across the entire firing line, "Arthur Morgan was the chief instructor at the Scout Sniper School in Quantico. He was responsible for developing and testing the very rifle platform you're holding. He has forgotten more about long-range marksmanship than you and your entire platoon will ever know. When he was your age, he was making shots in combat that men like you only read about in citations. So, I will ask you one time. Stand down and let the man work." Lieutenant Evans's face drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been struck. He could only manage a choked, "Yes, sir." He stumbled back, humbled and horrified, melting into the line of his equally stunned Marines. The reveal hung in the air, dong and profound. The quiet old man from the armory was not a janitor or a simple mechanic. He was a legend, a ghost from the Corps' hallowed past, walking among them. Arthur seemed unfazed by the introduction. He simply walked to the first bench, where Corporal Diaz's rifle lay. He didn't look at the corporal, who now refused to meet his gaze, his face burning with shame. Arthur picked up the rifle with a familiarity that was almost unnerving, as if it were an extension of his own arm. He unrolled his leather kit, revealing not complex electronics, but simple, elegant tools. A small, precise bubble level, a finely calibrated torque wrench, and a set of feeler gauges. He began his work in a profound silence, the only sound the gentle desert wind. He placed the rifle in a cradle, attaching one level to the receiver and another to the top of the scope's turret. The platoon watched, mesmerized. The two bubbles were not perfectly aligned. It was a minuscule discrepancy, invisible to the naked eye, but to a rifleman, it was a chasm. "Scope can't," Arthur murmured, more to himself than anyone. He gently loosened the scope rings, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. A tiny twist, a check of the levels, another infinitesimal adjustment. He then produced his torque wrench, tightening the screws in a precise star pattern, applying the exact number of inch-pounds required. The click of the wrench was the only sharp sound in the quiet. Next, he addressed the parallax. He stared through the scope at a distant target, his head moving slightly, checking for any perceived movement of the reticle. He made a minute adjustment to the side focus knob, his touch featherlight. Finally, he tested the scope's tracking, the reliability of its internal mechanics. He made a series of bold adjustments, 10 clicks up, 10 right, 10 down, 10 left, ending back at his starting point. He peered through the scope, a slight, satisfied grunt. The reticle had returned to its exact origin. He had just diagnosed and cured the rifle in less than 5 minutes, using nothing but feel, experience, and basic mechanical principles. He moved to the next rifle and the next, a silent, methodical master at his craft. He worked his way down the entire line, a one-man whirlwind of quiet competence. Each rifle received the same reverent, expert touch. The young Marines, once so arrogant, now watched with a dawning, profound sense of awe. They weren't watching a mechanic. They were witnessing an artist. When he was finished, he rolled up his tools and gave a simple nod to the colonel. "They'll shoot straight now." Colonel Hayes turned to the platoon. "On the line. 5 rounds, slow fire." The Marines scrambled to their positions, their movements now charged with a nervous energy. There was no more bravado, only a desperate hope. Corporal Diaz was first. He settled behind his rifle, the weapon feeling different in his hands, more solid, more true. He took a deep breath, lined up the crosshairs, and gently squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot was sharp, definitive. A moment later, the spotter's voice came over the radio, laced with disbelief. "Impact. Dead center. Bullseye." A collective exhale swept through the platoon. Diaz fired again. Bullseye, and again. Bullseye. A ragged cheer went up. Soon, the range was filled with the steady, rhythmic report of accurate fire. One by one, the Marines who had been unable to hit paper were now stacking rounds in the 10-ring. The tight, clustered shot groups on the targets were a testament to the old man's magic. The problem was never the wind, or the ammo, or the $3,000 scopes. It was cant. It was parallax. It was the tiny, overlooked details that technology couldn't fix, but a master's hands could. As the last shots were fired and the range was cleared, the platoon gathered, their targets in hand, each one a constellation of holes clustered around the center. They approached Arthur, who stood quietly beside the colonel. They didn't speak. They simply stood there, a line of young, humbled warriors, looking at the old man with a new, profound respect. Lieutenant Evans stepped forward, his posture rigid, his face pale. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Morgan, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Sir, I apologize for my ignorance and for my disrespect. There is no excuse." "Thank you." Arthur simply looked at him, his gaze not angry, but filled with a deep, weary understanding. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acceptance. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Arthur and Colonel Hayes stood alone. "You never lost the touch," Hayes said quietly. "You don't forget," Arthur replied, his eyes on the distant hills. "It's like breathing. You just have to remember to pay attention to the little things." The next morning, when Arthur arrived to open the armory, Corporal Diaz was waiting for him. The young Marine wasn't there to draw a weapon. He was holding a cup of coffee. "Master Guns," he said, his voice quiet and earnest. "I was wondering, if you weren't too busy, if you could show me how you did that with the levels." Arthur looked at the young man, at the genuine hunger for knowledge in his eyes, and a rare, small smile touched his lips. The true legacy of a warrior isn't just in the battles they fight, but in the wisdom they pass on. Respect isn't demanded by a uniform or a title. It is earned through quiet competence and unwavering dignity. The echoes of past glory can still be the key to future victories, if only we have the wisdom to listen. Subscribe to our channel if you believe that the greatest heroes are often the ones we overlook every day.